So this next part of the videos that we're going to watch really touches on a very touchy subject and something that is still incredibly prevalent in our society today. Um, it talks about the racial inequities and issues that were happening in the early part of the 20th century, in the early 1900s, and a couple of performers in particular. But the thing to remember is that even though slavery was abolished with Abraham Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation, the rights of black Americans in this country still had a long way to go. It was 100 years before a lot of changes happened, and we still have a lot of changes that need to happen today. Back during the time period we're talking about, it was illegal for black performers to be on the same stage as white performers at the same time, and you'll see that referenced to quite a bit. They talk about blackface minstrel shows, and we'll get into that a little more with some other characters as we go along. But there are a lot of things that they talk about, so really pay attention to what they're saying was happening during that time period. Again, we're looking at the late 1800s, early 1900s, so completely different than the time period we have now, although we still have a lot of the same racial issues that exist today.
Bert Williams is the funniest man I ever saw, and the saddest man I ever knew. W.C. Fields.
In 1910, Florenz Ziegfeld took a characteristic gamble, offering a Follies contract to a black comedian whose career had begun in the minstrel shows.
The American minstrel tradition is really the center of most American popular musical entertainment, at least till the advent, you could say, of rock and roll. It begins as whites impersonating blacks.
Come listen, all you gals and boys, I'm just from Tuckahoe. I'm going to sing a little song. My name's Jim Crow.
The white guys created the whole dialogue.
So this is a character putting on what's called blackface, and blackface went back into the early 1800s, had been around for a long time. And what you'll see with almost every blackface performer is they would paint their face black, but they would specifically paint their lips white. And the reason for that is because that was a symbol that showed other people that they were really not a black person. They were actually a white person who was wearing blackface, and the white lips were that symbol. And that's an important point that we'll see later on with an actor by the name of Bert Williams.
Y'all's a boss. Y'all's I just see just like that there. Well, how you feels about it? Well, I don't know about it. And they were the ones who created rolling the eyes. So now the African Americans are sitting out there looking at these white entertainers. They go, wait a minute, I can do better than they're doing.
Elements of the minstrel show, the dancing, the comic interludes, the cross-dressing, were appropriated by the musical. But few black minstrel performers ever made it to the Broadway stage. Egbert Williams, an immigrant from the West Indies, moved from minstrelsy to international acclaim, delighting audiences with comic routines and a dance called the cakewalk. And in 1903, Williams starred in Dahomey, the first full-length musical written and performed by blacks on Broadway.
The only way to make it on the stage in America during that time was to black up, who wear blackface. Hurt him to the quick. But he used it as a social statement. And behind that mask, he could say anything he wanted to.
I never done nothing no more.
So even though Burt Williams was actually a black actor, he would wear blackface and he would paint his lips white. And you'll notice that he also wore long sleeves all the time and usually wore gloves because there were a lot of people who didn't actually know that he was even a black performer. They assumed that he was a white performer wearing blackface. And that's why he painted his lips white.
Rather than appear in the same show with a colored man, many of Ziegfeld's performers threatened to quit. Ziegfeld called their bluff. "Go if you want to," he said. "I can replace every one of you, except the man you want me to fire."
I have never been able to discover that there was anything disgraceful in being a colored man, but I have often found it inconvenient. Burt Williams.
Williams had his Follies contract stipulate that he would not have to tour the South, nor appear on stage with white women.
I was a little Russian-born kid, son of an Orthodox rabbi, living on the Lower East Side of New York City. I never felt poverty because I'd never known anything else. We had an enormous family. In the summer, some of us slept on the fire escape or on the roof. I slept better in tenement houses than I do now in a nice bed. Irving Berlin.
You can imagine in 1893, a little boy arriving from Russia, Izzy Berlin, knowing no English. He said, "We look so strange there at Ellis Island," in what he called our Jew clothes. Completely out of place in this world.
His father taught him to sing. He would have sung in temple on the high holidays. So that music, that melancholy, minor, chromatic music went in the ear. Then there'd be the organ grinders playing Italian opera, and there'd be ragtime and minstrel music. He had an ear not just for the musical melody and for the rhythm, but for the sound of speech.
In 1907, as a singing waiter at a saloon off the Bowery, Izzy wrote the lyrics of his first song in an Italian dialect.
My sweet Mary from sunny Italy, oh, how I do love you.
So this is an actual recording of Irving Berlin singing this song a little over 100 years ago.
Say that you love me too, forevermore I will be.
On the first piece of music, there was a printer's error. Berlin instead of Berlin. Berlin was hard for people to pronounce. And he let it go. And he thought, that's a good name for an American songwriter.
There was only one place for Berlin to go to be a songwriter. Not Broadway, but a short block on West 28th Street, where pianos banged away from every open window. It was called Tin Pan Alley.
Tin Pan Alley was a couple of blocks in the 20s where all the song publishers set up shop. You sold the songs for a dime. Remember, no radio. Remember, no television. Remember, every house had a piano in the living room. That was a sign of great class.
Establishing himself on Tin Pan Alley, Berlin sold a variety of songs to the Ziegfeld Follies, leading the way for such distinguished talents as Victor Herbert, America's greatest composer of operettas, and Jerome Kern, whose songs often spiced up British musicals with American flavor.
So if you remember back when we were reading about some of these early composers in that one-page history, Jerome Kern and Victor Herbert were two names that were mentioned.
But Berlin was the first to write a Broadway musical incorporating the new beat of popular music, ragtime.
It's hard for us to imagine now, but ragtime in 1910 was scandalous. It was like rap music. It spelled the end of civilization as we knew it.
So every new generation that comes along, you know, if your parents don't like certain music that you listen to, your grandparents probably did not like some of the music that your parents listened to, and your great-grandparents probably did not like some of the music that your grandparents listened to. Every generation has that happen. So even when we're talking 100 years ago, this old ragtime music was something that people just really, the older population just really didn't like at all.
But in 1911, Irving Berlin writes a ragtime song that suddenly makes ragtime safe. It's not threatening. It's, come on along, come on along. Let me take you to the man. Once he has this enormous hit, Broadway opens its doors to Irving Berlin and to ragtime.
Between 1914 and 1962, Irving Berlin composed almost 24 Broadway shows and found a way to use music to capture the spirit of his adopted country.
Jerome Kern was once asked to place Irving Berlin in the history of American song. And Jerome said, Irving Berlin has no place in American music. Irving Berlin is American music.
Every nation, it seems, sailed across with their dreams to my New York. Every color and race found a comfortable place in my New York. The Dutchman bought Manhattan Island for a flask of booze, then sold controlling interest to the Irish and the Jews. And what chance has a Jones with the Cones and Malones in my New York?
In 1909, Irving Berlin provided a song for a young comedienne and suggested that she sing it with a fake Yiddish accent. It soon became the trademark of Fanny Brice.
Everyone was singing, dancing, springing at the wedding yesterday. Yidel on his fiddle played some ragtime, and when Sadie heard him play,
when Ziegfeld signed her in 1910 for $75 a week, Brice ran down Broadway with the contract, showing it to everyone she met.
So $75 a week back in that time period was a lot of money. Most people made an average of anywhere from $20 to $30 a week. So $75 a week was a lot of money.
It's very interesting to see Fanny Brice as a Ziegfeld star. When you think that Ziegfeld's mantra for the American woman was beauty. Here was a garrulous, certainly not by any standards, physically beautiful woman whose humor was all based on the pratfall, the wide eyes, the raucous delivery.
Fanny Brice was one of those incredible talents who was a comic, who was a mimic, who was a singer, who was a dancer, who could do practically everything.
Ein Sascha, der Pärchen auf der Pärchen. And though he's a non-schlemiel, still he's got sex appeal. Die Pärchen, klebt der Herz am Pärchen. Then I know right away that talking is crazy to
In anything Jewish I ever did, I wasn't standing apart, making fun. I was the race. And what happened to me on stage is what could happen to my people. They identified with me, which made it all right to get a laugh. Fanny Bryce.
Over there, send the word over there, that the Yanks are coming, the Yanks are coming.
When America joined World War I in 1917, George M. Cohan charged to his country's aid with a hit Tin Pan Alley number inspired by the first 3 notes of a bugle call. World War I changed the style of America's popular music as a wave of patriotic anthems swept everything else aside. With American boys overseas in the trenches, there was little interest in silly songs with foreign dialects or romantic operettas featuring European aristocrats. Of course, Ziegfeld let the public know where he stood. The finale to the Follies of 1917 featured not only Paul Revere and Abraham Lincoln, but President Woodrow Wilson himself reviewing the troops. Troops composed of Ziegfeld girls, that is.
Trumpet, ready, go!
There were 2 numbers that had the theme of the military. And at one part of the dance routine, we would go down to the footlights, and we would put our foot up on top of the footlights and lean over and sing to the audience that way.
To welcome the doughboys back home, Ziegfeld created an extravagant show of unparalleled artistry and expense. Irving Berlin chipped in with 9 songs, including a minstrel number called Mandy.
I was strolling down one evening by the silvery moon. I could hear somebody singing.
I started in the Follies in the New Amsterdam Theater. I was just a chorus girl. But in 1919, I became Marilyn Miller's understudy. She was famous, of course, for the Mandy routine that Irving Berlin wrote. Mandy, there's a minister handy, and it sure would be dandy if you let him make a fee. So don't you linger, here's a ring for your finger. Isn't it a humdinger? Come along and let the wedding chimes bring happy times for Mandy and me.
So sadly, Doris passed away right after this video was shot. She was 96 years old, so she was one of the original Ziegfeld Folly girls back in the 1920s.
In the theater, Florenz Ziegfeld exercised complete control. But outside the stage door, the power of the producer was challenged.
Revolt of the Thespians, August 1919, and Broadway actors put on a show that's no act. They are off stage and on strike.
Over there, we have been over there.
It was called the Red Summer of 1919, when labor unrest swept the nation. Strikes by steel workers, dressmakers, and finally, Broadway performers.
For we are striking, yes, we are striking, and we won't come back till the managers are there.
There was a big strike, and I joined in because before 1919, there was no protective union for actors. And of course, we worked for practically nothing.
Ziegfeld filed a legal action to prohibit Follies members from striking, but found that almost everyone was on the side of the actors.
The thing that broke the strike was that the musicians came out. And you can't run theater without musicians. And then the stagehands and electricians came out, and it was over in 2 days.
Actors were guaranteed payment for rehearsal, transportation home after an out-of-town flop, and no longer had to provide their own costumes.
You know what happened to me the night of the strike? I went to the theater as usual, made up and dressed. Then I came out of my dressing room and found the stage deserted and dark, the big auditorium empty, and the strike on. I had not been told. You see, I just didn't belong. Bert Williams.